Palace of the Great Thousand. In the sky above, a golden token radiated light. The three of them, led by Purple Cloud, true monarch, stared at the token, their faces shaking in shock. Clearly, they recognized its origin. And they knew all too well what the Palace of the Great Thousand represented. It was one of the most powerful super factions in the Great Thousand Worlds. In ancient times, it was the strongest shield defending against the invasion of the extraterritorial evil clan. Even in this peaceful era, when news of the Palace of the Great Thousand rarely surfaced, it didn't mean they had vanished. They had only retreated into the shadows, like a giant beast lying in wait, hidden in the dark corners of the Great Thousand Worlds. No one would doubt the foundation of the Palace of the Great Thousand. Even the 5 most ancient Gu clans of the Great Thousand Worlds would still show some hesitation when facing the palace. The 3 of them had super factions behind them, but compared to the Palace of the Great Thousand, they were nothing. No wonder Chen didn't care about the super factions behind them. With the Palace of the Great Thousand as his backing, no one would dare to touch him. However, the Palace of the Great Thousand had always been low-key and rarely intervened in the power struggles of the Great Thousand Worlds. Why, then, would Chen have a token from the palace? Moreover, the most important thing was that the token bore the words, Demon-Slaying King. Rumor had it that the current Palace of the Great Thousand only had one Demon-Slaying King, and the Demon-Slaying King never left their side. Where did Chen get a Demon-Slaying King's token? The 3 of them exchanged glances, each reading the other's confused expression. We've never heard of a second Demon-Slaying King in the Palace of the Great Thousand. Purple Cloud, true monarch's eyes flashed. Then he spoke in a low voice. Chen casually responded, "Well, now you know, don't you?" He glanced at the 3 of them with a half-smile, adding, "Do you doubt it's real? If you do, just report it truthfully to the super factions behind you." Seeing Chen's unconcerned attitude, the 3 of them felt a jolt of unease in their hearts. Chen must be aware of the consequences of impersonating a demon-slaying king. If the Palace of the Great Thousand investigated, he'd be in big trouble. Yet, he still brought out the demon-slaying king's token, meaning he wasn't worried about the palace's investigation. Could it be that he truly had become the second demon-slaying king of the Palace of the Great Thousand? If that were the case, then the 3 of them might have no choice but to swallow their pride, because with the strength of their own super factions, they absolutely couldn't afford to provoke the palace. The thought of this made their faces twist with frustration, as though they had swallowed a fly. Chen noticed their bitter expressions and smiled faintly. The reason he revealed the Palace of the Great Thousand's name was to intimidate the super factions behind Purple Cloud, True Monarch, and the others. In a way, this was a case of using a tiger's power to scare others, but it was done openly. According to his agreement with the palace, although he didn't hold the true powers of the demon-slaying king, he still held the status. If those heavenly supremes wanted to do something to him, they would have to consider the palace's influence. While Chen and the others were talking, the countless factions in the northern wilderness also came to their senses. In the previous shock, they gradually realized the meaning of the golden token. Thus, the eyes of all the factions turned to Manor's experts, suddenly burning with envy and jealousy. That was the Palace of the Great Thousand, one of the most top-tier super factions in the Great Thousand Worlds. No one had expected that behind Manor stood such a colossal power. If they had known this earlier, even Purple Cloud True Monarch wouldn't have dared to provoke Manor. With such a powerful background, coupled with a mansion master of exceptional talent and unimaginable potential, it was clear that Manor's future would be boundless. As the eyes of the onlookers grew hot with envy, the experts of Manor were also a little stunned. The turn of events had surprised everyone. How could the mansion master have the demon-slaying king's token from the Palace of the Great Thousand? Lu Tiandao and the others asked, their voices full of excitement and unease. They knew the consequences of impersonating the demon-slaying king, and they feared this might be something Chen had done on a whim. If that were the case, it could bring great disaster to Manor. Mandala shook her head upon hearing this, her eyes filled with astonishment. Clearly, she had not known this. While the people of Manor were anxious, Lingxi smiled faintly from the side and said, "This is indeed true. Chen is now the second demon-slaying king of the Palace of the Great Thousand." Shu, Hearing Ling Shi's direct confirmation, Lu Tiandao and the others immediately sucked in a cold breath, their anxiety quickly fading, and their faces filled with intense excitement. This was because they knew very well that with such a background, the rise of Mu Manor would soar to new heights. Not to mention the northern domain. Even if they looked at the entire Tianluo continent, there were probably very few people who would dare to target Mu Manor now. A commotion erupted across the northern wilderness, and among countless fiery gazes, Mu Chen looked at the three of purple cloud true monarch in the sky, then pointed at the spiritual power map above them and said, "Do you still have any objections to my division of territory?" He paused for a moment and added, "Of course, if the superpower factions behind you have any objections, feel free to voice them." The three of purple cloud true monarch twitched slightly, falling into silence. Mu Manor's direct occupation of half of the northern domain's territory was undoubtedly a major blow to their three sects. But even so, what could they do? The three of them had been defeated by Mu Chen together. No matter how powerful the superpower factions behind them were, could they surpass the Great Thousand Palace? The situation was stronger than their will. No matter how unwilling they were, they could only grit their teeth and accept it. On the northern wilderness, the many forces who witnessed the three fall silent felt a sudden shock in their hearts. They knew that from now on, the structure of the northern domain would change completely. The once untouchable three overlords were stepping back, and the newly risen Mu Manor would become the ruler of the northern domain. Mu Chen looked at the silently accepting purple cloud true monarch and the others, then nodded with satisfaction and smiled. "Since that's the case, from today onwards, these territories will belong to Mu Manor." As he spoke, his gaze swept across the many forces on the northern wilderness. Wherever his eyes passed, the leaders of all the forces slightly lowered their heads, not daring to meet the gaze of the newly emerged overlord of the northern domain. And now, within these territories, all forces are prohibited from relocating. Wait for Mu Manor to complete the consolidation, and from then on, you will all belong to Mu Manor. Mu Chen's voice echoed across the northern wilderness, once again causing some murmurs. The faces of the three of purple cloud true monarch darkened once more. Mu Chen not only intended to take the land, but also wanted to seize all the forces that originally belonged to them. However, compared to the grim faces of purple cloud true monarch and his group, the forces that were now declared to be under Mu Manor's control had strangely little opposition. On the contrary, some seemed to feel a hidden joy. After all, no matter which faction they joined, they would still have to pay tribute. Compared to the old three overlord forces, Mu Manor, which had recently risen, undoubtedly held much greater potential. If they joined at this time, their future prospects might even be stronger than they were now. After all, it was easier to flourish when backed by a giant tree. Mu Manor had the Great Thousand Palace as its background, and its potential was definitely greater than that of Purple Cloud Sect, Thunder Sound Mountain, or Golden Eagle Mansion. Meanwhile, the other forces that hadn't been absorbed into Mu Manor were silent, their eyes filled with hidden envy as they looked at the forces that had already joined. A wise bird chooses a strong tree to nest in. They too hoped for a stronger backing. Mu Chen paid no attention to the expressions of the three of purple cloud true monarch. Looking around, he smiled faintly and said, "Shall we consider today's matter finished?" It wasn't that he didn't want to unify the northern domain and become the undeniable overlord, but he didn't think now was the best time. Having already divided half of the northern domain's territory, it was enough for Mu Manor to digest it for a while. Moreover, if they became too greedy and provoked the superpower factions behind Purple Cloud True Monarch and the others to act out of anger, even with the Great Thousand Palace backing them, Mu Manor would still find itself in a dangerous situation. The wrath of the Heavenly Supreme was not something easily borne. Therefore, Mu Chen decided to delay his conquest of the northern domain. Once he truly broke through to the Heavenly Supreme and no longer feared the superpower factions, the northern domain would naturally fall into Mu Manor's control without him having to fight for it. The three of Purple Cloud True Monarch looked at Mu Chen with rage in their hearts, but had nowhere to vent it. They could only force out a faint smile and said, "Since the Manor Lord has won, we hope you can rid us of these things on us." Black liquid clung to their chests, and the terrifying corrosiveness caused their internal spiritual energy to remain in turmoil. They wanted to get rid of it, but found it extremely troublesome. Chen glanced at them and smiled. Don't worry, these demonic poison liquids won't take your lives. With your strength, you should be able to clear them completely within half a year. Clearly, he had no intention of stepping in to relieve them of their demonic poison, especially since Chen didn't have a favorable opinion of these three. If it weren't for the superpowers backing them, he might have directly struck them down today. Thus, while he couldn't eliminate them right now, Chen still wouldn't let them off easily. The three, Purple Cloud True Monarch and his companions, glared at Chen with angry, yet restrained eyes. They didn't dare to vent their fury. With a grunt, they turned and swiftly flew off, heading beyond the northern wilderness. Leave, their low, growling voices echoed over the northern wilderness. Their figures, rapidly retreating, were marked by an unmistakable sense of defeat. The various forces that still belonged to the three sects could only follow them with their heads hung low. Their once grand momentum was nowhere to be seen. Chen stood high in the air, gazing down at the northern wilderness. Aside from the many powerful figures from Mu Manor, there were now other forces scattered across the territory he had previously claimed. These factions would now become affiliated with Mu Manor. At this moment, these forces were understandably uneasy. In the past, some of them had tried to stop Mu Manor's experts, fearing that Chen might come back to settle old scores. Chen's eyes swept over them, as if he knew their concerns. His calm voice rang out across the vast sky. I'll not hold past events against you. If you perform meritoriously in the future, you will be rewarded the same as the people of Mu Manor. However, if you harbor ill intentions, know that Mu Manor's punishments will be as unrelenting as ever. Upon hearing Chen's words, the various factions couldn't help but rejoice. In the next moment, a thunderous chorus of respectful voices filled the air. We, humbly, follow the Manor Master's command. Lu Tiandao and the others, witnessing the grand spectacle, finally let out a sigh of relief. They knew that after today, the name of Mu Manor would spread far and wide across the Tianluo continent, and Chen's name would undoubtedly be ranked among the top figures on the Tianluo continent. Mandala raised her small face, gazing at the slender, youthful figure in the sky. A faint smile appeared on her delicate face. This guy actually did it. The struggle for dominance in the northern wilderness concluded with Mu Manor seizing nearly half of the region's territory, a result that caused a massive stir across the entire northern domain. At the outset, no one had supported Mu Manor, knowing that the three old overlord forces would likely join forces to crush this new rising power. This was not the first time something like this had happened in the northern domain. Many believed Mu Manor's ambition would end just like past attempts, crushed under the fury of the three major factions, suffering devastating losses and vanishing without a trace. So when the result of the northern wilderness struggle became known, countless people were left in stunned disbelief. They simply couldn't imagine how the young lord of Mu Manor possessed such unfathomable power, capable of fighting three opponents and defeating three experts on the verge of reaching Heavenly Supreme. After all, the Manor Master was rumored to only be at half-step great perfection. While everyone remained in a state of shock, some secretly grew envious, thinking Mu Manor's reckless actions would be their undoing. Behind the three sects were superpowers that provided support, and those sects were nothing more than puppets for these superpowers on the Tianluo continent. However, once they learned of the Palace of the Great Thousand, their envy turned to fear, and they quickly suppressed any further thoughts of resentment or rivalry. They now understood that even those superpowers would have to retreat in the face of such a massive force. It was then that they realized Mu Manor was no longer the same as those rootless factions of the past. Not only did they have an unfathomably powerful young Manor Master, but they were also backed by a top-tier superpower. Both in strength and support, Mu Manor was far more formidable than old overlords like the Purple Cloud sect. In the face of such a foe, it was no surprise that even when the three sects, Purple Cloud sect, Thunder Sound Mountain, and Golden Rock Mansion, joined forces, they were still defeated by Mu Manor. At this moment, every faction in the northern domain understood clearly, from now on, The true ruler of the northern domain would no longer be the three old overlords, but the Mu Manor, which had been established just 2 short years ago. The northern domain has changed forever. Countless factions in the northern domain echoed similar sentiments, and they began to pull every possible connection in an attempt to involve themselves, even a little, with Mu Manor. Everyone could see that the rise of Mu Manor was unstoppable. As one of the 5 regions of the Tianluo continent, the major events occurring in the northern domain could not escape the attention of the overlord factions in other regions of the Tianluo continent. Tianluo continent is a supercontinent, vast in area and rich in cultivation resources, which naturally attracts many superpower factions from the Great Thousand Worlds, all of whom are like hungry wolves waiting for an opportunity. However, because there are too many eyes watching, no one dares to act hastily, and thus, there exists an unspoken rule that the Heavenly Supreme does not easily interfere in disputes on Tianluo continent, allowing events to unfold naturally. Despite this, most of the overlord factions in various regions of Tianluo continent are backed by some superpower faction. When turmoil erupted in the northern domain, the overlord factions in other regions were secretly observing, eagerly hoping for chaos in the northern domain. Such disorder would provide them the opportunity to annex it. Therefore, when they learned that the 3 tyrants of the northern domain had been defeated by Mu Manor, some among them were eager to act. However, their intentions were soon quashed as they received messages from their powerful backers advising them against meddling in the murky waters of the northern domain. The message clearly stated that the young mansion master of Mu Manor was indeed the second demon slayer king of the palace of the Great Thousand. This revelation from their backers felt like a bucket of cold water splashed on those eager overlord factions, shocking them to the core. They had speculated about the origin of Mu Chen's Demon Slayer King token, but they had never imagined him to be the second Demon Slayer King of the Palace of the Great Thousand. After all, it is said that each Demon Slayer King of the Palace of the Great Thousand possesses the strength equivalent to that of a saint-grade Heavenly Supreme, existing at the pinnacle of the Great Thousand Worlds. How could there be a great perfection Demon Slayer King now? They had faint rumors about Mu Chen. It was this young man who gained the favor of the Flame Emperor and the martial ancestor when the ancient Heavenly Palace first emerged, reaping the richest rewards amidst the envy of countless others. However, at that time, Mu Chen was hardly notable in the eyes of these overlord factions. If it weren't for the fear of the Flame Emperor and the martial ancestors' reputations, they might have attempted to seize the ancient Heavenly Palace long ago. Yet, who could have anticipated that within a mere year, this once inconspicuous youth would become the Demon Slayer King of the Palace of the Great Thousand and rise to great perfection? Regardless of how unbelievable this was to them, they ultimately had no choice but to accept this harsh reality. They begrudgingly withdrew their ambitions, and some even sent congratulatory letters to Mu Manor, expressing their support and goodwill towards its dominance in the northern domain. In this larger context, word gradually spread across the entire Tianluo continent that a newly risen overlord named Mu Manor had appeared in the northern domain, and that the young mansion master was, in fact, a demon slayer king of the palace of the Great Thousand. In the northern domain, at Mu Manor, outside a grand hall, Mu Chen looked at the departing messenger who held a golden invitation in his hand, another congratulatory note sent from an overlord faction in a different region. So far, at least 8 other regional overlord factions have sent congratulatory notes, Mandala said, shaking her head in astonishment from behind Mu Chen. It's worth noting that the northern domain is currently in a state of unrest, making it an ideal time to take advantage of the chaos. Yet these fierce factions behaved with unexpected friendliness, instead of taking action against them. It seems your title as the Demon Slayer King of the Palace of the Great Thousand is indeed quite intimidating. Mandala smiled at Mu Chen, fully aware of the reason behind the friendly behavior of those factions. Mu Chen chuckled and reflected on how unexpectedly powerful the reputation of the Palace of the Great Thousand is. However, regrettably, as the Demon Slayer King, he doesn't possess any real authority. Otherwise, he wouldn't need to be cautious of the Futu ancient clan. He could simply storm in and rescue his mother. How is the recruitment going? Mu Chen asked, looking at Mandala. With the expansion of Mu Manor's domain, they occupy half of the northern domain, and there are countless factions, both big and small, that need to be brought under their control. Quite smooth. Mandala's delicate chin nodded slightly. After Mu Chun had displayed his terrifying strength and formidable background, almost no one in the entire northern domain dared to have any dissatisfaction with Mu Manor. Thus, these incorporations were surprisingly smooth, with some forces even eager to join Mu Manor's protection. Mu Chun smiled and nodded in response. He then stretched lazily and said, "Since that's the case, I'll leave the matters of Mu Manor to you." Upon hearing this, Mandala immediately rolled her eyes and said unhappily, "You want to be a hands-off boss again? I've secured the territory for you. How to manage it is naturally up to you." Mu Chun said confidently, then chuckled. "I've gained some insights into the second layer of one chi transforms 3 purities from the scripture pavilion. I need to focus and meditate." Mandala snorted lightly, but didn't say anything more. She knew very well that if Mu Manor were to continue expanding, it would need a pillar to support it. Mu Chun had already surpassed her, so that pillar could only be him. Mu Chun looked up and suddenly saw Tang Bing's figure coming from the distance. He quickly patted Mandala on the shoulder. "It's all yours now." With that, he disappeared from his spot. Mandala shook her head at how quickly Mu Chun had fled, then looked up at Tang Bing, who was walking briskly toward her. She said with a bit of irritation, "From now on, report all matters of Mu Manor to me." That guy ran off again. Tang Bing glanced at the spot where Mu Chun had disappeared, a flash of disappointment crossing her bright eyes. She smiled and nodded. In the ancient heavenly palace, the heavenly river wound like a giant dragon, its vast spiritual energy emanating, filling the heavens and earth. Deep within the heavenly river, Mu Chun sat quietly, preparing to continue his comprehension of the second layer of one chi transforms 3 purities. In his perception, it seemed that he had vaguely touched the threshold of the second layer, the 3 merges realm. Perhaps only a single opportunity was needed for him to truly break through. "Finally, I can enter seclusion," Mu Chun muttered to himself. During this period, he had been staying at Mu Manor to stabilize the people's hearts, even sacrificing much of his cultivation time. Now that the overall situation had been temporarily settled, he finally had some time for himself. As he spoke, his eyes gradually closed, his mind becoming focused. While Mu Chun began his closed-door cultivation, little did he know that, far away, a graceful figure was hurrying toward Tianluo continent at full speed. This figure was strikingly beautiful, but her aura was cold, like an icy mountain. It was none other than Qing Shuang, whom Mu Chun had met previously on Sacred Abyss continent. At this moment, Qing Shuang, rushing at full speed, had a serious expression on her delicate face as she looked at a map in her hand, which marked the coordinates of Tianluo continent. Her jade hand gripped the map tightly. "Mu Chun, Aunt Jing is in trouble." Mu Chun's seclusion did not last as long as he had hoped. On the 10th day of his retreat, his seclusion was abruptly interrupted by a communication. Deep in the heavenly river, Mu Chun opened his eyes. Before him, a purple light hovered, within which a purple petal was shaking, causing the space to tremble. Mu Chun's gaze tightened as he recognized the purple petal. This was a message from Mandala, and ordinarily, she wouldn't disturb him during his seclusion, unless something major had happened that she couldn't handle. Could it be that the superpowers behind the Purple Cloud sect have made a move? Mu Chun thought seriously. If those superpowers disregarded the deterrence of the Palace of the Great Thousand and decided to act against Mu Manor, it could indeed be troublesome. In the worst case, he might have to call in a favor from martial ancestor. Not having reached Heavenly Supreme, truly troublesome. Mu Chun furrowed his brows. In the Great Thousand Worlds, to truly dominate a region and make others wary, one needed the presence of a Heavenly Supreme. Otherwise, one would always be held back by various fears. With a sigh in his heart, Mu Chun extended his hand to grasp the purple petal and stood up. In an instant, his figure disappeared. In a grand hall at Mu Manor, Mu Chun's figure appeared. His gaze immediately landed on Mandala, who was accompanied by Ling Shi and Long Xiang. "What's going on?" Mu Chun asked. Mandala let out a quiet sigh of relief upon seeing Mu Chun. She then pointed to the hall and said, "Someone came looking for you." They insisted on seeing you in person. As she spoke, her eyes swept over Mu Chen meaningfully, and she teased, "Could it be that you're out there accumulating some romantic debts?" Mu Chen first cast a glance at her, then turned his gaze to the main hall, where he froze for a moment. In the hall stood a woman in a white gown, as pure as snow. She was tall and graceful. Her beauty was undeniable, but her aura was as cold and unyielding as a 1,000-year-old iceberg, sending a chill through the air. Qing Shuang. As Mu Chen stared at the graceful woman in the hall, he was taken aback. He never expected the person who came to Mu Manor to find him would be her. Qing Shuang looked at Mu Chen's appearance and let out a relieved sigh. Then, she gritted her teeth and said, "Mu Chen, Aunt Jing is in trouble." When Qing Shuang's voice echoed, Mu Chen's expression instantly changed. His body flashed, appearing before her in the blink of an eye. He grabbed her slender wrist and asked urgently, "What happened to my mother?" A vast surge of spiritual energy erupted from within him, causing the surrounding space to ripple. His emotions had clearly fluctuated intensely. Qing Shuang looked at Mu Chen's changing expression and sighed softly. Not long ago, Elders Haiguang and Mo Yin returned to the clan. They reported to the Great Elder that the Eightfold Pagoda had fallen into your hands. After that, they convened the Elder Council, intending to issue an order to send the law enforcement guards to forcibly bring you back to the clan and take the Eightfold Pagoda from you. Mu Chen's gaze turned cold at these words. These two old dogs just wouldn't let go. They had been stopped by the palace of the Great Thousand in Sacred Abyss City, yet they still hadn't given up. The Elder Council is mostly made up of the Xian lineage and Mo lineage. Although our Qing lineage opposed it, it was still useless. However, just as the clan order was about to pass. At this point, Qing Shuang gave a bitter smile and said, Aunt Jing suddenly stormed into the Elder Council. Mu Chen's expression darkened. Aunt Jing found out about the actions of Haiguang and Mo Yin and was immediately furious. She severely injured the two of them, then caused a huge commotion in the Elder Council, flipping it upside down. Qing Shuang smiled wryly. It was easy to imagine how earth-shattering that scene must have been. The Elder Council, where most of the clan's high-ranking elders gathered, was an intimidating force. Yet, even with that formidable presence, those normally lofty elders were utterly defeated in the face of Aunt Jing. Mu Chen took a deep breath. Then what happened? He knew that if things had ended there, Qing Shuang wouldn't have gone through the trouble of running to deliver the news. Qing Shuang sighed again. The situation escalated. The Great Elder had no choice but to step in and battle with Aunt Jing. In the end, it was a stalemate. The Great Elder had to use the ancient pagoda seal and invoke the power of the ancestral tower, forcibly imprisoning Aunt Jing inside it. Upon hearing this, an uncontrollable fury exploded in Mu Chen's eyes. His face turned ashen, and his voice was laced with a grim tone. What is the ancestral tower? It is the sacred artifact of the Futu ancient clan. It's said that the Futu clan's practitioners cultivate with the Eightfold Pagoda, which originates from the ancestral tower. Qing Shuang spoke softly. But the ancestral tower is rarely used. Once it is activated, even the Saint-grade Heavenly Supreme would fear it. Aunt Jing is now trapped inside, and she will likely never be the same again. Although Aunt Jing had been imprisoned by the clan before, with her strength, she could leave whenever she wanted. But now, being trapped in the ancestral tower, though her life is not in danger, she will certainly suffer some hardships. Mu Chen's expression remained blank, but his hands clenched slowly into fists, and his body trembled slightly. Anyone could tell that his emotions were like a volcano on the verge of erupting. Mu Chen, calm down. Ling Shi stepped forward, grasping Mu Chen's hand with her jade-like fingers and urging him in a low voice. These scoundrels. Mu Chen raised his face, his eyes bloodshot, brimming with murderous intent. His mother had been isolated and defenseless in the Futu ancient clan, yet she still regarded him as an unassailable line that should never be crossed. Once that line was touched, regardless of the consequences, she had no hesitation. Thinking of this, Mu Chen felt a wave of deep shame for being a son who couldn't protect his mother. Mu Chen, don't get too worked up. Although Aunt Jing is trapped in the ancestral tower, with her strength, she definitely won't come to harm. Even the Great Elder wouldn't dare to force her. If a Spirit Array Grandmaster, who is comparable to the Saint-grade Heavenly Supreme, decides to fight without hesitation, even the Futu ancient clan would suffer devastating consequences. That price is one the Futu ancient clan can't afford to pay. Qing Shuang quickly added. Aunt Jing's actions are simply a warning to the elders in the Futu ancient clan who are itching to move. At least now, the Great Elder has forcibly suppressed the clan's order from the Elder Council, preventing all Heavenly Supremes in the clan from taking any further action against you. However, before she could finish, she saw Mu Chen's cold, icy gaze fixed on her, his voice chilling. Should I thank them then? Qing Shuang smiled bitterly. That's not what I meant. But you must understand, everything Aunt Jing has done is to protect you. Mu Chen's gaze was grim, and after a long while, his trembling body gradually calmed down. He knew that no matter how angry he was now, it wouldn't change anything. Even if he lost his reason in his rage and went directly to the Floating Pagoda ancient clan, it would be of no use. Because his current strength was still insufficient to make the Floating Pagoda ancient clan fear him in the slightest. A perfect Earth Supreme was merely a great perfection in the Earth realm. In other places, such a power might be able to dominate, but for a superpower faction like the Floating Pagoda ancient clan, as long as one hadn't reached the Heavenly Supreme realm, they probably wouldn't even take notice. Mu Chen's eyes grew cold as he turned to Qing Shuang. Are you really just going to watch as my mother is left isolated and helpless? Qing Shuang bit her lip lightly and said, the Qing bloodline is currently in decline, and it's no match for the Xian bloodline or the Mo lineage. Moreover, the current leader of the Qing bloodline is conservative and weak, always unwilling to confront the other two lineages head-on, always retreating. Then it really is a useless bunch. They don't even understand the basic principle that if the lips are gone, the teeth will be cold. Mu Chun sneered mercilessly. Although he had never met the leader of the Qing bloodline, if they thought that mere compromise would secure survival, they were undoubtedly fools. Qing Shuang smiled bitterly but didn't argue, instead saying, the reason I came this time is to remind you. Although the turmoil caused by Aunt Jing has temporarily protected you from any immediate retaliation from the elders of the Floating Pagoda ancient clan, those elders have wide connections and know many Heavenly Supremes. While they can't act directly, they might still seek others to deal with you. Mu Chun narrowed his eyes, a cold glint flashing in them. A sense of frustration surged within him. When he first rose to power in Mu Manor and the Northern Domain, he had felt a subtle sense of pride, but now that pride was completely shattered. Though he seemed glorious in the Northern Domain, he still needed his mother's protection within the Floating Pagoda ancient clan, even risking her life to block many dangers for him. All of this was because his strength was still not enough. A perfect Earth Supreme was still too weak. If he had reached the Heavenly Supreme realm, the Floating Pagoda ancient clan would have no reason to fear him. At that time, his mother wouldn't need to be bound by the Floating Pagoda ancient clan just to protect him. Thank you. Mu Chun took a deep breath, suppressing the turmoil within him. He looked at Qing Shuang, his expression softening. No matter what, her coming from so far to deliver the message was enough to earn his gratitude. Qing Shuang shook her head, a hint of shame in her eyes. It's our inability to help you. Mu Chun waved his hand, fell silent for a moment, and then turned to Mandala and Ling Shi. I will temporarily leave Mu Manor. I'll leave the demon-slaying king token behind. If any Heavenly Supremes come looking for trouble, they won't find me with this token, and they won't make things difficult for Mu Manor. What about you? Mandala and Ling Shi asked in unison. Mu Chun raised his head, staring at the boundless sky. His black eyes gradually grew firm, and his hands clenched tightly. I should begin searching for my path to becoming a Heavenly Supreme. On the edge of the Northern Domain, atop a solitary mountain, Mu Chun stood at the mountain's peak, looking out at the vast land. These regions now belonged to Mu Manor, and under its control, these areas were gradually recovering and prospering. Mu Chun stared at the earth for a long while before slowly lifting his head and gazing at the heavens, his lips tightly pressed together. After breaking through to the perfect Earth Supreme realm, Mu Chun's cultivation had indeed become somewhat slack. He had originally thought he had enough time, But Qing Shuang's visit made him realize that every moment of leisure he took could cause his mother to suffer even more within the ancestral tower. At that moment, he completely crushed the slackness in his heart. He knew that if he wanted his mother to no longer be controlled by the floating pagoda ancient clan, he had to step into the heavenly supreme realm. "Father, I promised you when I left the northern spirit realm." Mu Chen's palms clenched slightly. Calculating the time, it had been many years since he left his homeland, and father and son had been separated for so long. He wasn't unwilling to return, but the promise he made when he left still remained unfulfilled. Perhaps, even now, his father was still in that small northern spirit realm, waiting day and night for his return. Though the place wasn't as wondrous and intricate as the Great Thousand Worlds, it still held a special place in Mu Chen's heart, always lingering in his thoughts. His emotions churned like the clouds in the sky, continuously rolling over. After a long while, Mu Chen slowly began to calm his mind and regain his composure. The path to Heavenly Supreme, he murmured to himself. Although he was eager to break through to the Heavenly Supreme realm, he fully understood just how difficult that step was. In the Great Thousand Worlds, geniuses were as numerous as the stars. While Mu Chen had indeed reached the peak of great perfection at his age, making him stand out like a dragon among men, he was not unique in that regard. Throughout the history of the Great Thousand Worlds, there were many prodigies like him, but among them, only a handful managed to break through the shackles and step into the Heavenly Supreme realm. Most of these prodigies remained stuck at the Great Perfection realm for their entire lives, gazing at the seemingly within reach, but ultimately unattainable Heavenly Supreme realm. Over time, they were eroded by the passage of years, their bones turning to dust. The gap between Earth Supreme and Heavenly Supreme was the true difference between heaven and earth. At present, Mu Chen stood at the pinnacle of Earth Supreme, yet in the eyes of true Heavenly Supremes, he was still no more than an ant. Therefore, he knew very well just how difficult the path to Heavenly Supreme was. It was a true test where millions would attempt to cross a single narrow bridge, with only a few succeeding. Confronted with this daunting path, even someone as confident as Mu Chen could not help but feel a slight unease deep within his heart. Sigh. Mu Chen exhaled deeply, gradually erasing his anxiety. He knew that there was no turning back. If he wanted to rescue his mother from the conservative and outdated Futu ancient clan, and if he wanted to speak with them peacefully, it wasn't impossible, but it had to be based on having enough power to back it up. Thus, the path to Heavenly Supreme was one that Mu Chen had no choice but to challenge, no matter the cost. As his state of mind gradually settled, Mu Chen's expression grew solemn. He extended his hand, and suddenly, white light surged from his palm. In the next moment, a round, crystal-like orb, about the size of a fist, appeared in his hand. The white spirit pearl emitted a faint mist, with spiritual energy swirling inside. Within it, a vague white dragon seemed to be writhing. White dragon spirit pearl. Mu Chen gazed at the orb, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. This spirit pearl had been left to him by the white dragon venerable when he was on the North San continent. Back then, Mu Chen had learned that the white dragon venerable came from a lower plane, one overtaken by the extraterritorial evil clan. The white dragon venerable had been the last survivor of that plane. When Mu Chen obtained the white dragon spirit pearl, he also learned some secrets from the residual spirit of the white dragon venerable. In his final moments, the white dragon venerable had told him that if one day Mu Chen could help expel the extraterritorial evil clan from that plane and restore it, he would receive an unimaginable opportunity. Although, at that time, the white dragon venerable, who had reached the supreme realm, seemed like an unreachable powerhouse, Mu Chen now knew that he had long surpassed the strength of the white dragon venerable back then. Yet, Mu Chen had a strong sense that this opportunity might prove to be a great help in his quest for the Heavenly Supreme Realm. He held the white dragon spirit pearl in his hand, activating his spiritual power, but the orb showed no response. Though he could faintly sense a faint spirit seal hidden deep inside the pearl, if he forced it, that delicate seal could shatter instantly. It seems I'll need to go to that plane to summon the white dragon venerable spirit, Mu Chen murmured to himself as he pondered. After a while, he closed his eyes and focused, sensing every corner of his body. The white dragon venerable had left a mark inside him, saying that once Mu Chen reached a certain level of strength, the mark would activate and guide him to the coordinates of that plane. Mu Chen's perception spread through every part of his body, even deep into his flesh. This deep exploration continued for what seemed like an incense stick's length of time. Suddenly, his tightly closed eyes snapped open, his spiritual energy surged, and his gaze sharply focused on the back of his left hand. A faint white light suddenly appeared within the flesh, slowly gathering and seeping out, eventually forming a white dragon mark the size of a thumb. The dragon mark twisted slightly, but made no further movement. It didn't guide any direction, and its stillness seemed as though it was waiting for something. Mu Chen narrowed his eyes, pondering for a moment before speaking softly. Is it testing my strength? The white dragon venerable had once said that only when his strength reached a certain level would this mark provide guidance. Otherwise, even if it guided him to that plane, it would only lead to his death. Boom. With that, Mu Chen lightly stomped his foot, and within his pupils, the crystal pagoda appeared. Spiritual energy surged within him, pouring into it without restraint. The next moment, crystal spiritual energy flowed endlessly through Mu Chen's body. A formidable spiritual pressure swept through the heavens and earth. Having completed this step, Mu Chen formed a hand seal, and purple gold light surged from behind him. The immortal golden body materialized, standing tall between heaven and earth, exuding an aura of immortality. Is this enough? Pushing his power to its peak, Mu Chen stared at the white dragon mark on the back of his hand. If this still couldn't activate it, then his path to Heavenly Supreme might require another method, one that would undoubtedly delay him further. Under his gaze, the white dragon mark remained still, but the stillness lasted only for a few breaths. Suddenly, radiant light burst from the dragon mark, and vaguely, the sound of a dragon's satisfied roar seemed to emerge. The dragon's head on the mark turned, pointing in a direction like a compass. Is it that direction? Mu Chen looked up in surprise. That direction seemed to point to the southwest of the Great Thousand Worlds, but he wondered which plane node of the White Dragon Venerable's realm was in that region. No matter how far that plane was, at least it gave Mu Chen a goal. All he needed to do now was journey forth. He slowly gathered his excitement and looked down at the vast lands of Mu Manor. Somewhere, beyond his sight, perhaps Mandala and Ling Shi were looking towards him. Wait for me. When I return, I'll make Mu Manor the ruler of this Tianluo continent. Mu Chen murmured towards the direction of Mu Manor, as if making a promise to them. Without hesitation, he waved his sleeve, causing the immortal golden body to dissipate. His figure transformed into a streak of light, shooting towards the southwest. Outside a grand hall in Mu Manor, Mandala and Ling Shi simultaneously felt something and looked up, gazing towards the southwest. After a long pause, they exchanged a glance and smiled. They believed that when Mu Chen returned to Mu Manor, the entire Tianluo would tremble.